I'm doing well, David.
Very excited to be sharing this conversation. If you're listening to this, this is an unlocked bonus episode. We put those out on Patreon, patreon.com/left reckoning. This is a conversation with our good friend, Nick Bowlin, talking about Big Sky, Montana. Really, really wild conversation about, I don't know, like wealth, exploitation of everyday people, and also how like the rich are doing a lot of weird things when it comes to democracy all across the country.
Yeah, I mean, a really great piece as a North Dakotan. Had no idea that all this was started because of enclosure of and land swaps put into private hands. It's interesting how that never turns out really good for anybody but the rich people.
Well, um, if you're listening to this or you're watching this, it means that we've unlocked this from the vault. We want to make sure that we can get as much of this stuff out there to everybody, but it really does help this program continue to grow. Helps Matt and I do this. It helps Matt and I talk to folks like Nick Bowlin. If you can consider supporting the program, so you can do that, patreon.com/left reckoning. You get the post game immediately after the main show, and you get all of these bonus episodes as soon as they come out on Sunday afternoon. Really good value, and it helps us keep going. And if you've been liking this program and all these kind of conversations that we have, please do consider supporting so that we can keep going. But without further ado, this is our conversation with Nick Bowlin about Big Sky, Montana. Enjoy. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David here, joined by Matt Leck, as always. Brother, how you doing?
I'm doing good, David. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man, I'm stoked to be here, and we're joined by our friend Nick Bowlin, a return guest on Left Reckoning, who is a freelance writer. You can read their works in places like The Guardian, High Country News, and most recently in Harper's magazine, in the most recent issue where they wrote about Big Sky, Montana. Nick, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me on.
Matt, have you been to Montana before? Is this your neck? Would you consider this your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I have been to Montana, but as a North Dakotan, I don't get farther than Red Lodge. That's where I get off, and during the summer, frankly, too, the off months. But yeah, I have been to Montana a number of times.
Cool. I would love to go, but as much as I love to just talk about vacations and things like that, we have this very serious, important story here, and like, I mean, there's a lot that is going on into this like Big Sky story. I mean, changes in America, big business and rich people, and how they kind of strong arm democracy, immigration, all this kind of stuff. But maybe just like to set us up, Nick, I mean, could you paint the picture of Big Sky, Montana, for people who don't have any conception of what this place is?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I started reporting this story, I think I looked back in like September 2022, and it took me about this long to even get somewhat of a handle on this weird place. But yeah, I mean, I think the, what you should know about Big Sky for the purposes of this story is that, essentially before 1970, Big Sky didn't really exist. It was created by a land swap with the Forest Service, essentially as a vacation destination. As a kind of skiing and golf destination for wealthy people. And because of this kind of unusual history, it's never been incorporated. So it's not a town in any legal sense. It doesn't have a town government, city council, mayor, zoning board, anything like that. And this has remained the case up until today. And, there's a lot of small unincorporated towns all over the place. Like, it's not that weird. But Big Sky is weird. In the Big Sky is home to this institution called the Yellowstone Club, which is probably safe to say like one of the more exclusive institutions on the planet. It's a private ski club. Members include Zuckerberg, Bezos, Tom Brady, Bill Gates. Pick pick an oligarch, and they probably have a home there. And it's essentially a private club. You buy in by buying a piece of property, houses 30, $60 million homes. It's built around a private ski hill. And this is one of the things that makes Big Sky unique. And so Big Sky has this private club. It has a public. It has a ski resort that's open to the public. They're right next to each other. And, for a long time, like the club is kind of off to the side. It's a vacation destination, the resort itself. But after the financial crisis, a hedge fund in Boston, private equity firm in Boston called Cross Harbor Capital, whose co-founder is a member of the Yellowstone Club. Yellowstone Club went bankrupt, along with two other luxury clubs in Big Sky, private clubs, and Cross Harbor acquired all three of these, kind of starts consolidating real estate holdings in Big Sky. And in the past 2 or 3 years, they've kind of this financial institution through a local developer arm has kind of expanded its vision from just owning the private clubs in Big Sky to trying to kind of buy the town. And this is why I kind of started in the 1970s with that land swap, is because Big Sky's unincorporated and because it's never had any government. There aren't any real guardrails preventing this. So in 2021, they bought kind of every single undeveloped acre of land in what you would think of as kind of the main town center of Big Sky. And without any town government, they kind of have uninterrupted say on what the town looks like. There isn't a government. There are kind of some local boards. There's like a tax board. There's a sewer board. Representatives of the Yellowstone Club or the financial institution that owns the Yellowstone Club sit on all of these boards. So it is this place that's kind of privatized in like the most pure sense you can imagine. Like there aren't public institutions. All of there isn't even public land. So you kind of walk around this place with this in mind, and you just start realizing, like I would just like look up properties on my phone, and I'd be like, so that's owned by Cross Harbor, that's owned by Cross Harbor, that's owned by Cross Harbor. Yeah, it's a very strange place. Sorry, I'll let you guys jump in, but that's my long-winded take on Big Sky.
No, I mean, it's very helpful, and we're going to sort of look at what that means for everyday folks in just a second. But like, I just want to note, to you and to the listener here that like, this is a very weird thing, and I think Big Sky really is like emblematic of it. But there's all these examples that we've been seeing over the past few years of this kind of fixation of the rich and powerful to try to pull themselves out of local democracy, right? Like famous examples of things like that most people are familiar with is like some rich neighborhood will like leave the city so they don't have to pay tax or something like that. Yeah. Elon Musk just had the Gigafactory here in Austin unseated from Austin so that he can do whatever the hell he wants there, right? There are just lots of examples of this kind of, I don't know, like pulling, property or things that are owned by the hyper wealthy or institutions where they're sort of exploiting workers or things like that from the influence of like local democratic control. That should worry you, even if you don't share my kind of, radical red flag politics. It should worry you when a bunch of people are saying, hey, I don't know if we want to do the same old democracy thing as the rest of y'all.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that really kind of helped me frame the story and how I was thinking about Big Sky was talking to this. He's a lecturer at Harvard. His name's Brian Highsmith. He's quoted in the piece, and he basically said, you could talk about this as a real estate story, you could talk about it as a finance story, but he's like, no, it's a democracy story. That and he framed it just like you did. That there are all these examples around the country of kind of big private interests either exploiting kind of unusual local jurisdictions like they did in this case, or just actively, tearing down democratic structures. And he mentioned, Disneyland in Florida, how, up until their recent conflict with DeSantis, they had kind of they had their own, that law that just kind of let them set the rules. The Musk thing, there's that collection of billionaires that bought all this land outside of the Bay Area. And, he said that this is, kind of the old version of the company town was a coal company that, had scrip in the company store. And he's like, we don't really have that anymore, but we do have this kind of new iteration of that where, it's often kind of built around, really high levels of property ownership concentration that they, in a local area, if like in Big Sky, if a company can, owns enough land, can take over local institutions, they might not own the town per se, but they call all the shots. There's no real way to oppose them.
Just an aside before David goes, Sturgis in South Dakota has a similar thing going on with a sort of corporate governance structure that actually went over the town residents' head during COVID to say, actually, we still need to have this giant rally that's going to bring a bunch of people in. And the townsfolk are like, I don't know so much about that. But I just thought that was fascinating how this sort of thing it is. And also in Flint, when they decided, hey, we actually can't do democracy to solve this water crisis. We need a special technocratic board put there by the governor. But yeah, it's it's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, on this, on Big Sky specifically, like, let's talk about the other side here, which is like the people who work and do services in Big Sky. And I have two questions. Like, what are the kind of, like, beyond these big questions of democracy, which I want to get back into in a minute, but what are the kind of issues here in Big Sky for everyday folks, like the people who are working at these kind of luxury spots? Can they live in the town? All that kind of stuff. And also just again, for setting the scene, I mean, how important is like tourism in the sense of like general tourism versus like elite tourism important for this area?
That's a really good question when it comes to Big Sky, because, I didn't get it all into the story, but I did some research on kind of like, ski town economic history. And there is this kind of like traditional model of like how a ski town makes money. And it's like, you get this, like, your middle class family to spend its one vacation a year into to get lift tickets and rent gear and go out to restaurants and that kind of thing. And one of the things that Big Sky kind of helped pioneer is that basically those people just make lift lines. They just take up space for the uber wealthy. And that was the kind of one of the things that the Yellowstone Club was really, the guy who founded it was this kind of like visionary in some ways, where he's like, no, we can have, the 1% of the 1% that will pay enormous amounts of money to not stand in lift lines, to, have a private ski mountain of their own. And, so it is this kind of, tourism push to this, elite kind of exclusive direction that I think that Big Sky is this kind of extreme version of it, but it's definitely not alone. There's a really interesting New York Times story recently about the co-founder of Netflix, who bought a ski mountain in Utah. And the way he's going to make money off of it is he bought it, and he said the best 2,000 acres of skiing here are private. You only get to ski it if you own property at the top of the mountain. So and then the other side of the resort, if you want to go up and buy a lift ticket and ski, you can. And it seems like that, as snowpack reduces, as the skiing, this is pretty specific to skiing, but as it becomes more, some mountains might not get snow in 20 years, that I think all the incentives are towards, something like this kind of private model. And you're asking about the workers. Um, you know, the no one would virtually no one would put their name on the record talking current employees of the Yellowstone Club or of the developer behind the club, because there's no unions. There's a private security force at the Yellowstone Club that I heard stories that we couldn't corroborate, but people are just running scared, about have kind of heard things about employees who have been pulled into back rooms or something. And then I think part of the other aspect of the exploitation is just that the economic dominance of tourism and kind of serving the wealthy in this area. Like there's not really any other jobs, or very few other jobs. And if you want to live in and around Big Sky, and if you're the sort of person who kind of wants to be around skiing, or maybe wants to, a lot of, for really understandable reasons, it's beautiful there, who want to be there. You can work in food service, you can work at one of the hotels, you can work on the mountain, but in each case, long hours, bad pay, crammed into employee housing. This is one of the ways in which it kind of does resemble the company towns of old, in that the Yellowstone Club and its owner are, I would say, almost by far the largest landlord in the area. Your boss is your landlord. You kind of can't get away from them controlling your life. And I guess the one thing I'll add is so much of this story is built around kind of luxury real estate. This has also made this part of Montana, not just Big Sky, but Bozeman, kind of Gallatin County as a whole, a destination for recently arrived undocumented immigrants and asylum seekers who are just pouring into the area for the construction firms, for the construction jobs. But this, has created this kind of whole other extra level of kind of an exploited underclass of workers, because, they're paid in cash under the table. They get dropped off at the hospital if they get hurt on the job. No protection from wage theft and workplace abuse of all many kinds. It was I think Big Sky is this pretty stark. There's kind of no middle in Big Sky. There's the richest people on the planet, quite literally, at the Yellowstone Club, and then there's this gigantic seasonal workforce that provides all these amenities, and there's kind of nothing in between.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a society, in a area that's geared towards elite consumption, isn't really going to be building the housing to say welcome those people who are building the housing. And can you just talk a little bit more about this sort of this, I guess, is seasonal workers? Because I've been fascinated with this. I remember in 2016 we're talking about how can Bernie appeal to folks in Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, these areas, at least, and I'm sure it's true of the other state, but this is part of the country I know. A lot of summer work on lakes and stuff like that. And those types of people really could use, say, federal health insurance, so they don't have to depend on the boss. Who often, I know people who work in Red Lodge, they go there and they stayed with a pizza shop owner because there's no other housing available. Just talk to us a little bit about this type of worker.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's what you described. I mean, that's how these places operate. There's no full-time employees, right? Like you're hired for the season, and they just hire. I mean, Big Sky's population is less than 2,000 people, and I saw some statistics about employment numbers from the Yellowstone Club, and it's like many times this stated population of the town itself. It's just an army of people, and I mean, it's almost. I think it's unusual to find someone who isn't living in a place that is owned by their boss, whether it's at the level of like the Yellowstone Club or, yeah, like the construction companies who have, a couple mobile homes here and there or a condo and they just like stuff their guys in there. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's this kind of amazing in a not great way ecosystem of, um, you know, in some ways there's this kind of like implicit ski town trade-off, which I'm sure applies to the lake life, to
Mm-hmm.
any kind of recreation and amenity dependent area in a beautiful place where you have young people who want to, I mean, ski towns are really fun, right? That's the point, right? Like you can ski all day, and if you work at the resort, you get a free lift pass and party all night. And the trade-off is, you have to put up with your abusive boss, and you're going to get paid like crap. And you have no, there's no workplace, workplace standards are low to non-existent. But in return, you'll get to live in the mountains in Montana for the winter and ski a lot, and that is that's this kind of implicit trade-off that a lot of these places they don't function without it. I mean, Big Sky doesn't have people to groom the trails and serve the drinks and wash the dishes without that
Mm-hmm.
being the case. And I mean, I think a lot of people kind of take it on consciously, but doesn't make it okay.
I mean, like, you've covered a lot of these kind of industries, Nick, where there is a kind of like work culture, or like even like in the larger culture, like think about like Roughnecks, for example, where it's like
Yeah.
whenever it comes to talking about their working conditions, like, well, this is just how it is. We work hard, we get hurt, but we make some money while we do it. It's a very great thing for a boss to have a kind of story like that, where in this case it's like, oh, we're just ski bums, and we're just like living it easy. And it's like, yeah, I might be living in a overcramped and dirty place and not getting paid very well, but that's the life I signed up for.
Yeah. Right, it's in the name, right? Like you're saying, oh, just like be a ski bum for the winter. It's kind of like the expectation is that you're going to be mistreated in some ways. And this is one of the things I wanted to capture in this story is that, even though Big Sky isn't a town, really, and it's certainly not a town in the sense that it like has public institutions, you know, the kind of ski town working class, like there is a real culture there, and there's like a real community.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of, one of the kind of final scenes in the story is their end of season party, where kind of despite it all, they have found ways to kind of band together and have fun. And like Big Sky might be a fake place, but like these people are real, and they've kind of made it work somehow. But there's limits to that, right? Like all of them are going to leave, right? Like no one can stay there. No one can ever own a house there. Or you just do that for the rest. You're just like, I'm just going to do this for the rest of my life. And I tried to kind of parse that a little bit, what that means. And as you say, I think it very much plays into the financial interests of the bosses in these areas.
Yeah, can I just jump in there? Like, I mean, I am a little bit, I don't want to get too, upper Midwest nationalistic, but it does offend me a little bit that people go and create and help build these ski resorts and destinations, and then a private equity firm from Boston gets to come in and just be like, I'll have some of that because the economy went down. It's like that value could have never been created without this type of worker like going there and like sure having fun, but they might not be asked back next year. They can't plan a family on that sort of stuff. And some other guys, because they had money in the financial crisis, get to come in and say that's ours now.
Yeah, and the private equity firm specializes in distressed assets, is kind of its history. And so yeah, I mean, the Yellowstone Club and there are two other private clubs in Big Sky. They went under and they just pounced and found this place that was kind of perfectly set up to let a financial entity kind of expand its hold a little farther all the time. And I think it's interesting that the whole history of Big Sky had started with a land swap. Public Forest Service land becoming the town of Big Sky. The Yellowstone Club was created with a land swap, and now the Yellowstone Club is involved in a new land swap in the Crazy Mountains. That, on paper, their part of it isn't very big, but they're the main player in the swap is this billionaire named David Lucian. Interesting guy. He's kind of an early investor in fracking. I wanted to write a lot more about him, and I think he was at Goldman Sachs before he went to start his own firm. But he's the largest private landowner in this section of Montana called the Crazy Mountains. The Yellowstone Club owns an 18,000 acre ranch in the Crazy Mountains, and if the swap goes through, you can kind of see Lucian consolidating his private holdings, which are not all that far from the Yellowstone Club's holdings, and he's a member there, so you can kind of see, the whole history of this place has been the conversion of public resources into private, and you can see that that's the future too. That's the whole way this place kind of sustains itself.
Yeah, I mean, I have to ask though before we get away from the kind of work stuff.
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about companionship, because there's a very odd kind of arrangement that you noted in your piece about somebody who was sort of paid to show up and hang around at the bar at these clubs, to make conversation with. I mean, when you were mentioning the folks who are in the club, I don't know, like Tom Brady, I guess, is an athlete, but he strikes me as a very odd guy. Bill Gates is a strange fellow too. I mean, could you talk about that scene? Because I just found that to be a really fascinating kind of amenity to offer.
yeah. No, so yeah, you're referring to this woman who, to her credit, she doesn't work at the club anymore, but was willing to talk on the record and was there kind of from the beginning. And she was just like, yeah, like, the early club members, it was like Dan Quayle, the former vice president, Bill Gates, Greg LeMond, who ended up, he was involved in like lawsuits regarding the club, just like a weird mix of people. But she was just like, yeah, we were, we would ski, we would do kind of ski hill stuff. And then after hours, like, we would hang out with these people. And yeah, and it was this kind of sense of like, they go there to obtain this sense of normalcy. And if people really want to get into this, I would highly recommend a book called Billionaire Wilderness, by a guy named Justin Farrell. And he's a sociologist or anthropologist. I don't really know what the difference is, at Yale. But he wrote a book about, it's about Jackson Hole, but there's a chapter about the Yellowstone Club. And it's fascinating. He really gets into how, the hyper wealthy who come to Jackson and who come to Big Sky, he fixates on Wrangler jeans, that they have like jeans that they put on as soon as they get to Wyoming or Montana. And that's one of the things that they're buying at these places, is this kind of artificial normalcy. And that, from the perspective of Noelle, she was the one who was kind of there at the beginning. She was saying that, like, yeah, that's one of the things we were paid for, was to kind of like give the club members a sense of like, oh, you like, this is your, like, winter in a ski town. Like, you're hanging out with the ski bums too, even though it was literally Bill Gates. Yeah, it's a very weird place. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really would. I would pay a lot of money to be a fly on the wall there. So maybe another revenue opportunity for the Yellowstone.
Let's go skiing.
But I mean, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit. I mean, like, so we painted the picture here. Working conditions don't really seem like they're the best. There's a fear about housing for folks, working class people. How does this intersect, with this kind of government system that they have put into place into Big Sky? Like, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, what it actually is there, but also just, to help me understand this, like, what would maybe be possibly what is not being done because of this
Yeah,
kind of system that they have?
it's a really good question. And just before we get away from the kind of workforce stuff, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there's a J1 visa category for it's often like students who come from overseas and like spend a winter working somewhere. And the resort itself, the Big Sky Resort and the club rely heavily on J1. And there's some bad stuff. There was a lawsuit a couple years ago against the club by a group of Jamaican workers who said that they, had their tips taken, that, the non-white workers were kind of like put in the kitchen or in the basement and like never got to interact with the members. And yeah, so I wanted to make sure that the J1 mentioned them. But yeah, so I think when it comes to this governance structure, one of the things that I think is worth pointing out is that so there's big stuff, right? Like, affordable housing being built versus all the the kind of the hyper luxury housing. But when I was talking to people, like even like the smallest decisions made by like the tax board that has a majority of the votes are employees of or affiliated somehow with the club or with the club's owner. They put a tax on a luxury tax that included like cases of beer and wine. And like everyone in town was like, well, we don't go to restaurants. Like there's no restaurant I can go to in Big Sky. So if like I want to have a beer after work, I go to the gas station and like get a 6-pack. And when they expanded this tax on luxury goods to like cases of beer, it was funny that, I mean, how it goes, like you never know what people are going to get upset about. But it was this thing where people were like, it was like, at least we have like cheap beer in Big Sky. And the board, of course, like there's no one on there who would speak up and say like, I don't have the money to go to a fancy restaurant, but I can at least like get a 6-pack after work. So it's kind of a mundane example, but when there is kind of no one speaking up for the interests of the people working there, and in part because there's no constituency, right? Like all the workers are seasonal, like they all pass through. They don't have permanent housing, so often it's hard to register to vote. So at all these institutions, like there really is no representative of like all of the the people who kind of make the place run.
I was just gonna say, like, it's probably not like the best comparison, but like, I'm sorry, like I don't. That's not like a mundane example at all, right? Like it's almost like a comically like apt example of like the kind of thing that like if you were just like running any kind of like boomtown, you would know, hey, let's not increase the price. Like I couldn't imagine like a Deadwood. For people who watch that show, a Deadwood episode where like the council that was running the town was like, got in trouble because they were trying to raise money off of, tax on liquor. Anyway, I'm just saying it's like 100%. It's showing that like even on those kind of things that might seem maybe light or superficial, there's zero consideration of like the vast majority of people in kind of basic democratic orientation that you would expect.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, that the I talked to this guy in the story. This is kind of where the beer example came up. A guy who he stocks shelves at one of the delis in town, but he tried to run for this board, and I think he knew he was going to lose. But I talked to him, and I talked to some people in town, kind of some other people who worked the lifts or worked at the club, winter seasonal workers. And I would kind of always end my interviews by asking like, do you vote here? Or like, have you ever voted here? Like, do you pay attention to the tax board? And it was almost just like a universal no. And it's not because these people don't care about politics or don't care about what's happening in their town. It was basically just like feeling disenfranchised because in some cases you couldn't even register to vote if you're going to be there for 3 months or something. But also because there's just this pervasive sense that like it's not going to make a difference, and that the board, like I said, majority of the votes our kind of answer to, or answer to, there's like a vice president at the developer, there's like the head of the Yellowstone Club HOA, and there's the head of the Yellowstone Club's philanthropy team are 3 of the 5 votes. And they're just like, why would I spend any time, learning about the candidates, paying attention to policy? Like, they feel like the decisions are already being made, and they're probably not wrong.
Well, lastly, I just wanted to ask, like, how much of this do you think is particular to like Montana? Because I feel like Montana as a state is sort of going through this general crisis of democracy, and just like all of this money just flooding into these areas, Like there's been money in Montana, like there's been people who made money before there, but it's wild what's happening right now.
I think like post-COVID, maybe even in Montana, like when I was in Red Lodge, folks talked about a shift and a lot more outside big money coming in post-COVID.
Yeah, Montana, I think. So, like, I live in Western Colorado, right? Kind of among ski towns, and it's like, you know, surrounded by the hyper rich, but like this has been happening in Colorado for decades, right? So like the whatever kind of all the inequality here, bad housing, all like it kind of gradually came to place, and then yeah, when you talk to people in Montana, they basically all talk about like it happened yesterday, like since COVID, that the influx of the kind of Zoom boom, and combined with this the uber wealthy coming in there, and yeah, I mean the median housing price in Bozeman hit $1 million in February, and like Bozeman used to be this like funky little college town that like you could work for the Forest Service and like find a rental for like 400. Like, that wasn't even that long ago that was Bozeman. And now it's got like dozens of tech and biotech companies have headquarters there. Yeah, the $1 million thing, it also had the high, not related, it had the highest, 2023 Montana had the highest rate of like homelessness increase in the country was Montana. And I've talked to some housing groups there, and they say it's almost universally longtime Montanans who like abruptly lose their housing and end up on the streets. Like that's where that increase is coming from. And like that's how fast it's happening. Like, you have a rental one month, the next month you don't. There's like the vacancy rate in Bozeman was like 1%. And for those who don't know, Bozeman is kind of 45 miles from Big Sky, so there's a lot of like economic interchange. One of the if you were a winter worker at the resort, they might put you up at the Super 8 motel in Bozeman, for example. So there's a kind of symbiotic relationship there. But then Bozeman itself has kind of become a destination, and it's the pace of change in Montana is it's remarkable.
It reminds me a lot of what's happening here in New York in the Hudson Valley. A lot of people who have lived up there are being displaced by wealthier folks who are buying up the properties because it's nice to have a second home on the Hudson River, and yeah, that's the people who are being unhoused on it. It's a pretty wild dynamic to see both in New York and Montana.
And combine this with it's interesting how Montana state politics have changed, and how it relates to some of this stuff, because they're between Gianforte becoming governor and kind of super majorities in the legislature. I would love someone to try to piece out how much of that is related to the kind of stereotypical like political refugee from like the West Coast, right? Because like everyone talks about how many Californians have showed up there, and the stereotype is someone who like has kind of a wants some stereotypical big sky, big hat, libertarian dream in Montana, and how much of that's contributed to the shift in state politics. And I mean, there's surely other factors going on there, but
It's funny. We've definitely talked about it. I'm sure, Nick, if not on the show or privately, with that dumbass meme from a few years back, where it was like complaining. It was basically trying to tell like New York hipsters, you got to leave New York and you got to move to Montana because we could take over Bozeman basically. And all that we're seeing is like that is actually happening, but ironically, it's sort of a lot of right wingers who are doing that first of all, but also it's a human disaster. It's displacing so many people. It's really creating havoc.
Those numbers about the extra housing stock, that we have, and I agree that we should tax, landlords who hold housing stock, but there's not the capacity to take an influx of people who are moving just to like help swing elections, for instance.
Yeah. No, and it's not really. I don't really know what Montana does here. And one of the other things that's really interesting and that I would have loved to get into with this story is that Montana has kind of historically funded itself on like natural resource severance taxes, like oil, gas, coal, timber. They haven't figured out how to tax land. And the stereotypical one is the rural land write-off as an agricultural property, that a lot of the luxury ranches that Ted Turner and that they own that are on paper are paying minuscule taxes because they're agricultural properties, and but like that's Montana's commodity right now is luxury real estate, like the kind you get in Big Sky, and then luxury rural properties, ranches up in the mountains, and like that's that's Montana's commodity. Like that's what it's offering right now, and it has not there. It's I would love to be able to quantify this somehow, but it's getting just a minuscule fraction of the taxes that you could get from that sort of thing. In part, one of the things I learned reporting this story is that real estate transactions in Montana are private. So it's really hard to get. You can get like change of ownership, but there's no publicly available data on how much a property sold for. So it's really hard to get any sort of sense of how how much these properties have appreciated in value, and just how much money the state might be losing out on.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to, I think, do another deep dive into Montana soon. We've done a couple episodes on it, but it definitely seems like it's at front lines of a few different things right now. Nick, this piece is really great. It's called Jesus Christ, let me try that one again. It's called Slippery Slope in Harper's Magazine. Truly, truly excellent. Folks, there will be a link below for you to go and check it out. Is there anything else that people should be following or checking out or looking forward to?
Oh man. Well, I guess the only other thing is I brought up that kind of Bozeman as an immigration destination. I wrote another story that was the Harper's folks were kind enough to let me carve off this reporting, because otherwise the story would have been, no one would read it. It was so long. Into a different piece, kind of focused on the immigration workforce in this area broadly, and that ran. It was co-published in High Country News and The Nation. Also came out a couple weeks ago. So there's too much going on in Gallatin County for me to fit it into one story. But that's just another important piece of this whole tangle. But yeah.
Well, folks, we'll definitely link to that as well. Y'all should be following and reading Nick's work wherever you can. It's always good talking with you, friend.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's fun.
Thanks, Nick.